The Friday story you thought you knew was only half the truth. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Ice Cube's phone rang. Not buzzed. Not chimed. Rang. In the kind of silence that only exists after midnight, when the world feels paused and even the city seems to exhale. Who calls at that hour unless something has gone terribly wrong? For a split second, Cube didn't move. He stared at the ceiling. The glow of the digital clock burned red in the darkness. 2:03 a.m. Calls at that hour rarely bring good news. Family emergency. Legal trouble. Death. He picked up. On the other end was a studio executive. Controlled. Corporate. The message was short. The movie was dead. Again. No deal. No progress. No green light. No final Friday. For more than 2 decades, Ice Cube had been fighting to finish the story. Negotiating. Walking away. Coming back. Compromising. Refusing to compromise. And now, once again, the answer was no. After nearly 30 years of waiting, it felt like the end of something much bigger than a film. But here's the question that really matters. How did a small, low-budget comedy about one ordinary day in South Central Los Angeles become one of the most influential cultural films of a generation? And why did it take almost 3 decades to try to finish a story that, on the surface, seemed so simple? Because what you're about to understand isn't just about a movie. It's about ownership, friendship, ego, sudden fame, loss, pride, and a cultural legacy that refused to fade. By the time we reach the later chapters of this story, you may never look at Friday the same way again. A comedy born from frustration, not fun. Most people assume Friday began as a fun idea. It didn't. It began with irritation, almost resentment. In the early 1990s, Hollywood had a very specific lens for South Central Los Angeles. And that lens was narrow. Gangs. Drive-bys. Police sirens. Desperation. Films like Boys and the Hood and Colors were powerful. Necessary. Important. But they showed only one version of reality. Ice Cube knew that reality intimately. He had lived it. He had performed it. He had starred in it. He had written lyrics that dissected it with surgical precision. But something kept gnawing at him. Was that all people thought South Central was? Where were the afternoons sitting on porches? Where were the endless jokes between friends? Where were the ordinary days where nothing exploded, no one died, and people just existed? Cube and DJ Pooh remembered something different. Yes, there was struggle. Yes, there was tension. But there was also laughter. There were characters. There were neighbors who talked too much. There were cousins who overstayed their welcome. There were bullies who terrified you, but also made you shake your head in disbelief. There were good days. And those days mattered. Why, Cube asked, doesn't anyone show that part? Was Hollywood incapable of seeing joy in black neighborhoods? Or was joy simply less profitable than tragedy? That frustration became fuel. Friday wasn't designed to deny hardship. It was designed to balance the narrative. And that subtle shift would change everything. You want to do a comedy? When Ice Cube told people he wanted to make a comedy, the reactions ranged from confusion to disbelief. This was the same man who had delivered America's Most Wanted and Death Certificate, albums layered with political fire and unapologetic confrontation. He was intense, calculated, sharp. A stoner comedy? Some friends thought it was a joke. Others warned him it could damage his credibility. Hollywood quietly wondered if audiences would even accept it. Cube's response was simple and revealing. I'm a reality rapper. And reality includes good days. That sentence wasn't just a defense. It was a philosophy. Why was trauma always seen as authentic, but laughter wasn't? Why did portraying joy somehow make your struggle less real? That contradiction fascinated Cube. And he was determined to challenge it. They were ready to risk everything. Before a single studio said yes, Cube and DJ Pooh were prepared to gamble everything. They studied independent filmmaking like students cramming for finals. Hollywood shuffle. Clerks. Small locations. Minimal cast. Simple premise. They talked about maxing out credit cards. Multiple ones. They debated filming in black and white to cut costs. Picture that for a moment. Imagine Friday without its sun-soaked Los Angeles color. Without the bright blue sky. Without the warm glow of that quiet suburban street. Would it still feel the same? Would it still feel alive? It almost didn't get the chance. Because they were close to shooting it themselves. Then, almost at the last minute, New Line Cinema stepped in. Not with a massive budget. Not with full faith. But with just enough money to make it real. Sometimes belief doesn't arrive as a standing ovation. Sometimes it arrives as a reluctant check. The street was a character too. When you watch Friday, the neighborhood feels alive. That wasn't accidental. Cube and Pooh wanted the street to feel like a living organism, breathing, watching, reacting. They chose a real residential block. The kind of street where everyone knows everyone. Where news travels faster than cars. The houses weren't glamorous. The lawns weren't pristine. But there was texture. Familiarity. History embedded in cracked sidewalks and worn fences. You could almost feel the heat radiating from the pavement. You could hear distant music drifting from open windows. You could sense the rhythm of an ordinary day unfolding. Because that's what it was meant to be. One day. That was the genius of it. No elaborate plot. No ticking bomb. No grand mission. Just two friends trying to get through a Friday. Why was that revolutionary? Because sometimes the most radical act is showing normalcy. The characters were almost too real. Craig getting fired on his day off? That wasn't creative exaggeration. That happened to Ice Cube's cousin. Exactly like that. Smokey's chaotic weed hustle and constant paranoia? Pulled straight from DJ Pooh's memories. Debo. There was always a Debo in every neighborhood. The silent enforcer. The guy who didn't need to talk because his presence did all the speaking. Felicia. Everyone knew a Felicia. These characters weren't caricatures. They were composites of lived experience. And that authenticity gave the film something rare. Recognition. Audiences didn't just laugh. They pointed at the screen and said, "I know someone like that." When art mirrors life that closely, it becomes personal. And personal stories travel further. The quiet sacrifice that almost broke the partnership. Here's something many fans never knew. DJ Pooh created Smokey. Smokey was based on him. The voice. The mannerisms. The frantic logic. The hustle. But when it came time to cast the role, the studio hesitated. They wanted a recognizable face. A proven comedian. Someone marketable. Pooh wasn't that. The role he had built from his own memories was taken from him. He was offered a smaller part instead. Imagine creating something deeply personal, then being told you're not good enough to embody it. That kind of blow can fracture partnerships. It can plant resentment. It can quietly poison collaboration. But Pooh stayed. Why? Because he believed in the project more than he believed in his ego. That decision mattered. Without it, Friday may have collapsed before filming even began. How many classic films exist because someone chose the bigger vision over personal pride? The audition that almost ended it all. Big names were floated for Smokey. Chris Rock. Tommy Davidson. But Ice Cube had his eye on someone else. A rising comedian from Def Comedy Jam. High-pitched voice. Elastic face. Wild energy. Chris Tucker. Cube saw something electric in him. Something unpredictable. Then came the audition. And it bombed. Tucker was exhausted. Unfocused. Off rhythm. The jokes didn't land. The room felt uncomfortable. Studio executives were ready to move on. It would have been easy. Just cast someone safer. But Director F. Gary Gray hesitated. He saw flashes. Tiny sparks beneath the awkwardness. He asked for one more audition. One more chance. What if he hadn't? What if he had simply nodded and moved on? How many iconic performances almost never happen because someone doesn't get a second shot? The dinner that changed comedy history. Angela Means, cast as Felicia, noticed Tucker struggling. Instead of staying in her lane, she invited him over. Spaghetti. Conversation. Rehearsal. Not in a studio. Not under fluorescent lights. In a kitchen. They broke down scenes. They talked rhythm. They dissected Smokey's fear of Big Worm. They laughed through the lines. And somewhere between bites and banter, something shifted. Chris Tucker stopped trying to perform Smokey. He started understanding him. Smokey wasn't just funny. He was terrified. He was broke. He was improvising his way through life. That emotional truth grounded the comedy. The second audition. Electric. The room that had doubted him leaned forward. Sometimes breakthroughs don't happen in corporate offices. They happen in kitchens. The magic of improvisation. Many of Smokey's most iconic lines weren't written. They were born in the moment. The script existed. The structure was there. But after filming the scripted version, Tucker was given space. Freedom. He riffed. Reacted. Pushed boundaries. And the camera rolled. The cast's laughter often wasn't acting. It was genuine surprise. Improvisation is dangerous. It can derail tone. It can create chaos. But when it works, it feels alive. And Friday feels alive. That's why scenes still circulate decades later. Because they don't feel manufactured. They feel discovered. By Felicia was an accident. Angela Means made a small, unscripted choice. She sat between Craig and Smokey instead of hovering in the background. The moment felt intrusive. Annoying. Real. Cube delivered the line casually. By Felicia. It wasn't emphasized. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to echo through history. And yet it did. Years later, the phrase resurfaced in internet culture. Memes. GIFs. Everyday conversations. A throwaway line became linguistic currency. Why? Because it captured something universal, dismissing nonsense without effort. The best cultural moments often aren't engineered. They slip through the cracks of planning. The release that changed everything. When Friday hit theaters in 1995, expectations were modest. Small budget. Unproven comedic formula. Limited marketing. But something happened. Word spread. Audiences laughed harder than expected. They quoted lines in parking lots. They returned with friends. The film made far more than predicted. Not blockbuster numbers, but something more valuable. Longevity. It became rewatchable. Quotable. Comforting. A film you put on when you wanted familiarity. A film that felt like home. And suddenly, Ice Cube wasn't just a rapper-turned-actor. He was a comedic force. But success brings new complications. Fame, friction, and diverging paths. Chris Tucker's performance exploded. Hollywood noticed. Soon came money talks. Then rush hour. His paycheck multiplied. His fame skyrocketed. And when it came time to discuss sequels, tension crept in. Cube wanted continuity. Tucker wanted evolution. He also had personal reasons, religious growth, discomfort with certain themes, and a desire to shift his public image. He declined to return for next Friday. Fans were stunned. How do you continue a franchise without its breakout star? Cube pivoted. New characters. New setting. New energy. It worked, but differently. The chemistry shifted. The tone evolved. Was it better? Worse? Or just different? That debate still lives. Loss that changed the tone forever. Then came heartbreak. John Witherspoon. Pops. The gravel-voiced father whose monologues felt like backyard wisdom passed down through generations. He wasn't just comic relief. He was grounding. Warmth beneath the jokes. When Witherspoon passed away in 2019, something shifted. The possibility of Final Friday felt heavier. Because now it wouldn't just be about laughter. It would be about absence. How do you finish a story when key pieces are gone? How do you honor legacy without turning it into nostalgia? The ownership battle. Here's where the story turns complicated. Ice Cube didn't own the Friday franchise outright. The studio did. That meant negotiations, budgets, creative control discussions, disagreements about direction. Cube pushed for authenticity. The studio weighed risk. Years passed. Fans asked. Memes circulated. Where's Final Friday? Behind the scenes, it wasn't about ideas. It was about ownership. Who gets to decide when a cultural story ends? The creator or the corporation? That 2 a.m. phone call wasn't just about a film. It was about control. Why it still matters. Why does a movie about one ordinary Friday still resonate? Because it preserved something. A rhythm. A neighborhood dynamic. A type of humor that felt unfiltered but never mean-spirited. It showed black life without spectacle. Without tragedy as the centerpiece. It allowed characters to simply exist. And that normalcy was powerful. In a media landscape that often amplifies extremes, Friday felt grounded. Relatable. Human. The unfinished question. Will Final Friday ever happen? No one knows. But maybe the deeper question is this. Does it need to? Or has the original already completed its mission? Sometimes stories don't end with a final chapter. Sometimes they echo. Every time someone says, "Bye, Felicia." Every time a meme resurfaces. Every time someone puts the movie on during a quiet afternoon. That street lives again. Craig and Smokey sit on the porch. The sun hangs high. Not dramatically. Not symbolically. Just high enough to bake the sidewalks and make the air shimmer. The neighborhood hums, cars passing too fast, somebody's music bleeding through thin apartment walls, laughter drifting from a porch where time doesn't seem to matter. And for a moment, it's just another Friday. Ordinary. Funny. Unforgettable. No one knew it yet. How could they? Who ever recognizes history while it's still wearing house shoes and cracking jokes on a front lawn? Back then, it felt small. Intimate. Almost disposable. And maybe that was always enough. That irritation you see on screen, the eye roll, the tone, the split-second dismissal? It was real. Ice Cube's "Bye, Felicia" wasn't carefully written or rehearsed. It wasn't polished in a writer's room. It came from instinct, from genuine annoyance in the moment. A throwaway line, born from authenticity, became one of the most quoted phrases in pop culture history. But have you ever stopped to ask why that line lasted? Was it the humor, or the truth behind it? Because fame has a way of freezing moments in time. And once frozen, they can become prisons. Behind the laughter, real pain. Angela Means didn't just play Felicia. She became Felicia, to the world. Years later, she revealed the cost. Strangers shouted the line at her. Mocked her. Dismissed her humanity with the same words that made the audience laugh. She was reduced to a meme before memes had a name. How do you escape a character the world refuses to let die? How do you remind people you're more than a punchline? For a long time, she couldn't. The character overshadowed the person. Casting opportunities shrank. The industry moved on, but the joke followed her everywhere. Today, Angela Means has rebuilt her life on her own terms, running a successful vegan restaurant and redefining her legacy far from the shadows of that porch. Her story is a quiet reminder that actors don't get to choose how the world treats the characters they play. And sometimes, the laugh comes with scars. Nobody got rich, at first. The budget for Friday was under $3 million. Let that sink in. The actors were paid around $5,000. No back-end deals. No guarantees. No idea that the film would become a cultural earthquake. They weren't chasing wealth. They were chasing honesty. And somehow, that was enough to turn a small, risky project into a film that grossed over $27 million and launched a franchise worth exponentially more. Did anyone expect that kind of impact? Or were they just hoping to make something real before Hollywood shut the door? Sometimes, the most influential art is born from limitation, not excess. A comedy that changed Hollywood. Before Friday, Hood films were heavy, grim, serious, tragic, pain without release. After Friday, laughter entered the conversation. It didn't deny struggle, it lived inside it. It showed that humor could exist alongside hardship without disrespecting it. That joy could be radical. That survival itself could be funny. Entire genres followed. But why did Friday hit where others didn't? Was it the jokes, or the feeling that these people were real? The porch. The neighborhood. The conversations that wandered nowhere and everywhere at the same time. It felt like home, even if you'd never been there. The mystery of Chris Tucker's exit. When next Friday was announced, fans had one burning question. Where was Smokey? Chris Tucker's absence stunned audiences. The energy felt different. Something was missing, even if the laughs were still there. Ice Cube said Tucker turned down $10 to $12 million due to religion and personal values. Tucker later confirmed part of that, but added layers. He didn't want to encourage weed culture anymore. He didn't want to be trapped in one role. And looming over it all was another truth. The rush hour effect. Chris Tucker was on the edge of something massive. Rush hour was coming. Global fame. International success. Paychecks climbing toward $20 million per film. From a business standpoint, the decision was obvious. Even John Witherspoon joked that if someone offered him that kind of money, he wouldn't have come back either. So was it really betrayal? Or simply evolution? A quiet feud no one wanted to admit. But money wasn't the whole story. There was tension, quiet, unresolved, never fully denied. Who deserved credit? Ice Cube created the world. Chris Tucker transformed Smokey into lightning. When improvisation becomes iconic, who owns it? The writer, or the performer who makes it immortal? That question fractured their friendship. A line in Next Friday hinted at it. Fans caught it. Speculation grew. Silence followed. Some arguments don't explode. They just fade, and take decades to heal. The tragedy that followed success. Then came the losses. Bernie Mac, gone at 50. John Witherspoon, gone at 77. Tiny Debo Lister, gone at 62. A.J. Johnson, gone at 55. Each death felt personal. Each absence left an empty chair on that porch. How do you return to a world when the people who built it aren't there anymore? How do you laugh when memory keeps interrupting the joke? Time, it turns out, is the one thing no franchise can outrun. The 20-year fight for ownership. For decades, fans asked one question. Why not one last Friday? The answer wasn't creative, it was legal. Ice Cube didn't own the rights. Warner Brothers did. And Cube refused to finish the story without control. No shortcuts. No compromises. For 20 years, he fought. Deals collapsed. Hope faded. Rumors surfaced and disappeared. Was it stubbornness, or principle? Was the weight protecting the legacy, or slowly burying it? The miracle ending no one expected. Then, in 2025, everything changed. A deal was reached. Last Friday became real. And for the first time in decades, Chris Tucker is expected to return. The reunion will be joyful. And heartbreaking. Because some legends won't be there to see it. Their absence will echo in every scene. In every laugh. In every quiet pause where memory fills the silence. One final good day. Friday began as an act of defiance. It survived improvisation, sacrifice, feuds, loss, and time itself. And now, finally, it gets an ending. So here's the real question. Are you ready to see how it all ends? And will that last day feel the same, knowing everything it took to get there? Tell me, which secret surprised you the most? And does Smokey's return feel overdue, or perfectly timed? Because sometimes, the most important stories take the longest to finish.